Hey, good morning and Lloyd.
Good
Uh,
Moed, Rabbi.
okay, so hopefully we all obviously are here. If we're on the phone, that means we've survived. So that's the
Yeah.
first step. We hopefully survived and prospered and enjoyed the beginning of Pesach. The beginning part is the hardest part. Takes the most effort that we pay. We pay a high price for our freedom, whether it's physical, financial, emotional, in terms of sleep, in terms of eating, lack of sleep, the lack of eating. Um, you know, Pesach is a very demanding holiday, and despite or because of those things, it's very precious. The consciousness of the Jewish people, as we know, people who do almost nothing else, they do Pesach in some form, although we have to be mindful of the fact that for so many people, their understanding of it is limited and maybe even distorted. So we have to feel that, along with a general sense of identifying with our fellow Jews, you have to recognize and be grateful that we have a level of understanding of what Pesach really is about, and try in whatever way to care for and to help more people receive the benefit and have the privilege of understanding what Pesach really is and what Pesach really isn't. So we spent already a few weeks in advance going through some details, and it's not just details. There are people who say I'm a details person, I'm not a details person. Some people like to see the trees, some people like to see the forest. Certainly, there's a lot of technicalities that get involved in preparing for Pesach and all of the removal of chametz, and even once the holiday gets underway, there's a lot of, I think, the Seder itself is very scripted. There's a lot of steps and a lot of things that have to be done just so. We talk about sometimes you have to eat more than a kazayas, sometimes you have to eat less than a kazayas, sometimes you have to eat the same thing 2 or 3 times in a row, and you have to say this when you're eating it, eat it sitting up, and eat it lying down. And there's a lot of detail. And as we know, the question of the 4 sons, the question of the wise son, which is obviously the best question, if you can use the word best. The question of the wise son is what are the testimonies, the laws, different 3 different terms are used in Hebrew for different kinds of laws. Eidos, Kukim, and Mishpatim, laws that we do understand, laws that we don't understand, laws that commemorate things. He wants to know what they all are, and the response that we're told is, we tell them about the fact that the last thing we eat at the Seder has to be the current Pesach, the lamb. Today we have the Afikoman in place of that. And that seems to be one very specific and very technical law, so all kinds of interpretations as to why that law is mentioned. Maybe it means everything up to and including that law. Maybe the law itself is symbolic because it symbolizes the idea that the last taste in your mouth has to be the Pesach that has to linger in your memory and not be replaced by something else. And so too the ideas and the concepts of the Seder have to remain with the person. It seems, just from the simple surface reading of it, is that the question of the wise son centers on all these technical details. He doesn't say, what are the moral lessons of the Exodus? What philosophical ideas we're meant to learn? What are the emotions that I should be feeling? We end off the Haggadah by making the famous statement right before we going into the beginning of the Hallel, as we get ready to drink the second cup at the end of the Haggadah, we make the statement that in every generation, a person that I personally, each one of us came out of Egypt, not just my ancestors, but me myself. And that's not what the wise son asks about. He doesn't say, how can I reach a state where I can visualize myself as if I personally came out of Egypt? That would sound like an important question. Then he wants to know, what are the laws, what are the rules, And I think it's almost somebody who's lived a life of a observance who can appreciate this. You know, the idea of the laws is just guidelines, and these are the procedures to get it right. But you know, that's obviously just the technical stuff, right? Let's get to the main point. But the wise son understands that this is the main point. Has a famous concept of the Beis Halevi, the first Rabbi Soloveitchik, founder of the Soloveitchik dynasty. So he says, and it's really, I'm sure he adds more, and I'm sure I'm oversimplifying the piece, but the basic concept is really is from Rashi, and Rashi really is simply reading and translating a scriptural verse. It says in the Torah a statement which is repeated in the Haggadah more than once. Because of this, Hashem did for me when I came out of Egypt. And we read that statement very carefully and derive very specific, practical conclusions from that sentence. In the Haggadah, it's used as a definition of how and when the Haggadah has to be recited. It's not from the beginning of the month, not even from the morning of this very day, but it has to be in the evening when the matzah and the maror are on the table, and the story has to center around these items. That's why we say in the Haggadah that anyone who doesn't discuss the three items hasn't fulfilled the obligation. Pesach, matzah, and maror, they aren't just props. This data and the telling of the story revolves around them, these symbolic foods. And the mitzvah is the parameters of the mitzvah are precisely that they have to take place at the time when the matzah and the maror and the pesach are on the table. So it also serves as the answer to two of the four sons. It's mentioned in the response to the wicked son and the simple and the son who doesn't know how to ask. Well, the simple statement, if it's translated literally, sounds backwards. It says, because of this, Hashem did for me, and referring obviously to the matzah and the maror. That's the whole inference. Because these things, this has to be there. It has to be able to point to something. There must be some object that I'm holding up and showing to people that my telling of the story is revolving around. But if that's the case, the statement should say, this is here because Hashem has taken me out of Egypt. That's why I have these things. In case you're wondering why these things are on the table, like the son who asked the four questions, what is all this stuff that we're doing? The answer is, these things are here because God took us out of Egypt. So why does it say exactly the opposite? It says, because of this, Hashem took me out of Egypt. So Rashi says, Rashi explains it. Because of this, because Hashem wanted me to fulfill His commandments. So because I was going to fulfill His commandments, because I was going to fulfill His commandments, so that I would fulfill His commandments, Hashem took me out of Egypt. So this is the basic concept. We were taken out of Egypt to fulfill the commandments. But the Beis Halevi of Soloveitchik takes it one step further, and he says the statement, if we take it to its most basic and most direct literal interpretation, is telling us that the matzah and the maror are not the result of the Exodus, they are the cause of the Exodus. Not just kind of in a generic sense. The matzah is a commandment, and Hashem wants me to fulfill commandments, because if anything, the matzah will be the last commandment that you would use as an example. You can't tell me that Hashem took me out of Egypt so that I would do commandments like the one that was given me to commemorate how I came out of Egypt. Sounds circular. So he says, no, it's this commandment itself. The matzah itself was the cause of coming out of Egypt, because it's a mistake to think that Hashem took us out of Egypt, and for that reason, he said, we'll need to commemorate this. Let's come up with a commandment that will help us remember how we came out of Egypt. Oh, let's use the matzah. The matzah will be very effective. First of all, this is just my parenthetical point. I'm not convinced that if I had to come up with something that would be a good commemoration, I would have come up with the matzah. It does kind of symbolize, the matzah was baked quickly, they came out quickly. Okay, that gets you, so far. Then we go, really to the nth degree, matzah, not just at the Seder, but for an entire week, only matzah, no chametz, not even a crumb of chametz. And we go all out with this matzah. I mean, is that the best way? Is that the only way that you could commemorate the Exodus? There's so many things you could do if you really wanted to remember the story. I mean, think about Purim. We read the Megillah, it's like 12 chapters, the whole narrative, play by play, the drama, we go the Sukkot, we sit in the sukkah. The Jews sat in the sukkahs when they came out of Egypt, when they kept traveling through the desert. We can sit in the shelter and feel ourselves. We can put sand on the floor and walk barefoot on the sand. We can carry bricks around to symbolize and try to experience the slavery. There are so many things that a person could do. Matzah is a nice commemoration. But it seems that if it's just, God's best effort to help us remember the Exodus, or I guess I would say that human understanding, I think, is a little bit falls short of being able to feel that compelling sense that this is absolutely the one and only and best way to commemorate the Exodus. So the Beis Halevi explains that we have it really backwards. The Torah was written, as the rabbis tell us, before the world was created, a long time before the world was created. As a matter of fact, the rabbis tell us that Hashem looked into the Torah and created the world. And how that works out, obviously, is something that will give us a headache if we think about it too much. Not the kind of thing we can understand. Ramban addresses this a little bit. He says the Torah can be read on different levels, in different ways. It can be read entirely as names of God, different names of God. It also can be read as a story of events. The Torah, in its sort of essential form, is simply Hashem's name. Many names of Hashem strung along with one after the other. And then as the world came into existence and history unfolded, the Torah, another manner of reading the Torah was revealed, in which the Torah actually described the events in real time. But the point is that if the Torah tells you to eat masa and maror, and that was written into the narrative of the Torah, it's a given that those ideas came into existence before the world was even created, before there was an Egypt, before there was a Jewish people. So Beis Halevi says, and we know as Jews that we'll all acknowledge this if we stop and think about it. What is the purpose of the world? What is the purpose of human life? What is the purpose of Jewish life? To do mitzvahs. This is the basic. Anyone who's read Mitzvahs Hashem, Path of the Just. He says this is the fundamental idea, fundamental thought process that each of us has to embark on if we're going to get anywhere in life. He said the foundation of our entire journey in seeking to fulfill our destiny on this earth is to have a clear understanding of the answer to this question: what is my responsibility in this world of mine, in my own personal little world, my place in the universe? What is expected of me? What should the goal of my efforts be? And says, it's a famous one of the most famous opening lines of any book in the whole library of Jewish literature. The fundamental foundation, the starting point, the building block, the square one, whatever you want to call it, of our journey as Jews is not to be kind people or to be spiritual people or to be energetic people or to be any number of other things. Our starting point of our journey is to ask a serious question, to think seriously about the answer, and not a question that we ask ourselves once or twice, but it's a question that he says elsewhere needs to be revolving in our minds at all times, whether in our conscious mind or in our subconscious mind. We have to be asking ourselves this question. It seems like almost a strange thing. How can a person's life live around the question? But if you were you ever listen to a business guru, one of these CEOs who gives seminars to other CEOs, and they talk about the people who are really trying, to pursue their ambitions and do something big, make a lot of money, build a big multinational company. So you'll hear the same kind of lingo. You'll say, a person has to always, if you have a business, you always have to ask yourself the question, how can I make my product better? What is my goal? How do I define my niche in the market? What makes my product unique? And these are things that people who they live with a mission, even if it's a kind of mundane mission. A person's an artist. An artist will say, every day I wake up and I say, where can I find beauty in the world? How can I translate my feelings onto the canvas? People who dedicate their lives to something. A person who specializes in something humanitarian, a doctor, a social worker, an aid worker might say, I wake up every day thinking about how I can make the world a better place, how I can help people. So the Jew has to wake up every morning and say, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? And the premise of that question is that I'm here for a reason, and there is something I'm supposed to be doing. And he phrases it carefully. He says, what is his obligation in his world, and towards what must a person place his or her orientation, goal, intention in everything that the person toils in all the days of their life. In other words, it's not a question of whether you're going to be willing to work hard towards the goal or not, because the premise is everyone is going to work hard towards a goal. The question just is, what is the goal going to be? Or maybe even more precisely, what is the goal that all my efforts should be directed to? If you don't have a particular goal that all your efforts are directed to, you may work for multiple goals. You may find yourself, one day you're working to meet a deadline, the next day you're working to plan a vacation, the next day you're working to address a health issue, and the next day you're working to clean your house. And people live like that. The Jews in Egypt were working to fulfill the agenda of the Egyptians, of Pharaoh. And the idea of paganism is that there are multiple forces that all have bearing on my life, and I have to deal with and maybe serve and work for whatever force is the dominant force of the moment. So there's no centrality, there's no goal, there's no oneness, there's no purpose in all of it. But a Jew says, there is something. I'm here for a reason, and there is something in all of my efforts, whether it's my efforts to go to work, whether it's my efforts to take care of myself, whether it's my efforts to take care of others, whether it's my efforts to enjoy life in the constructive sense of being in a positive frame of mind so that I can be relaxed and more able to devote my efforts to a higher purpose, whatever it is, there has to be one single goal that underlies all of it. And again, we can relate to this more. We use real life examples. If you think of a person as an ambassador to another country, what is the job of an ambassador? I don't know. I've never been one, but I imagine it's a little bit different from an accountant. Let's say now, an accountant comes to work, and it isn't always the same. Obviously, tax season has its own unique set of circumstances, and there are quiet times. There are certain, major jobs and then smaller jobs. But an accountant's basic job is to show up at the office to balance the books, to have a certain understanding of finances, and maybe in some cases there's creativity as well. But an accountant's job is to be an accountant. It has to do with numbers, with budgeting, with financial understanding. Right? A lawyer maybe may experience more drama in their job, depending on what kind of lawyer they are. There might be courtroom, there might be interviews, there might even be field work. Basically, a lawyer's job is to practice law. Now, an ambassador, again, I've never been one, but my understanding is ambassador goes to a country, and what do? All kinds of things. Sometimes they go to parties. Sometimes they host parties. They might go golfing with people. Then again, if they come with a family, they may have to register their kids in local schools. They may need to learn a new language. They may need to help their family learn a new language. They might need to spend time befriending their neighbors and learning about native cuisine. They might need to attend celebrations of the local culture. Um, they might need to do accounting too. There are all kinds of things that go into being an ambassador. And you say, well, how does this? What kind of a job? How is this a job? One day you're doing this, one day you're doing that, one day you're having a time. You're going to a party, you're attending a lecture, you're giving a lecture, you're doing finance. The answer is, I have one job. Everything that I do reflects just one job. My job is to be in this place for a certain period of time, and within this sphere that I operate, my job is to represent my country in the best possible way. The way I dress, the way I talk, the way I carry myself, the places I go to, the places I don't go to, the people I talk to, the people I don't talk to, the things that I say, the things that I don't say, all of them have to serve the purpose of furthering, promoting, enhancing my country's influence, my country's image, my country's impact. But that's exactly a description of our job in this world. We come to this world from a very distant place. We have to put on clothing that is strange to us. Our soul has to enter a body which is very foreign. Things that the body wants, likes, and needs are not what the soul wants, likes, and needs. We have to interact with a very alien culture, right? The temporary nature of this world, the short-term gratification, the value system of this world are very much diametrically opposed to the values of the soul. And we have to do all kinds of things. We need to go to events. Sometimes we need to go on vacations. Those aren't really spiritual things per se. Sometimes we need to pay our taxes. It's not really a spiritual activity. And sometimes we need to mop the floors. We need to do all kinds of things. And of course, there are things that seem more spiritual. We need to study Torah. We need to daven. We need to do mitzvos. We need to do chesed. All of these things, the Mitzvot Hashem tells us, every single one of them, without exception, every single moment and every single act, and every single non-act, everything we say and everything that we don't say needs to be guided by this purpose. We have one mission. The mission is to pass through this world and choose wisely at every moment, to choose the more spiritual path and to recognize the illusion of the physical world, to understand that this world is not the purpose, to understand that the next world is the purpose. We can even think of our job as that of the ambassador. It's, in a larger sense, to promote the awareness of Hashem, the influence of Hashem, so to speak, Hashem on the world, to be a good representative through our actions, through our words, through the way we dress, the places that we go and the places that we don't go, in every way, to convey the message of Hashem to the world. But ultimately, right, think of the ambassador whose mission is to represent his country. But why is he doing it? Either because he loves his country or because he's getting paid. Usually it's a combination of both. As Jews, ideally we should do it because we love Hashem and we want to further the work of bringing awareness of Hashem to the world. As human beings, it also helps to know that we're getting paid. This is our job. And as a matter of fact, Ramchal raises it in the second way, at least in a foundational sense. We have to recognize what our job is. What are we getting paid to do? Because we're here in this world, right? Our paycheck is not what we receive now, but what we receive when the job is over. Again, an ambassador has perks, right? If he goes to state dinners, the food might be good, but it's a big mistake if he thinks he's going to the state dinner because of the food. Because what happens if he has a choice between getting another helping of steak or having a conversation with the queen of whatever country happens to be sitting next to him at the banquet? If he's here because they serve good food at state dinners, then he doesn't want to waste time talking to the queen. He'd rather eat the steak. Then he's not doing his job. But if he understands that I'm here to be an ambassador, so I make sure to talk to all the heads of state and all the ambassadors that are here. And, when I have a few moments, I do need to eat something. If I don't eat anything, then I'm not going to be a good conversationalist. and I can't realistically expect to go to a state dinner and not eat anything. So I'll eat the steak, but I have to understand that the steak is secondary. Right? It's true about a CEO. You go to a business lunch. If you focus on the food and not on the person sitting across the table, that's a pretty big waste of an opportunity. It's okay to enjoy the food, but you have to understand why you're really here. And that's the mission. This is the basic question that has to be in our heads at all time. And again, people do this all the time. We don't always recognize, but it's the same process. People who have a mission and understand that their mission will take them into all kinds of areas that may not be easily identifiable as a mission. Right? This is true in relationships. A person has a relationship with someone, whether it's a family member or a friend, and if it's a serious relationship and it requires investment of time and effort, maybe the person needs something. So I'm trying to help them through a difficult situation. So maybe I need to take them out to eat sometimes, or maybe even take off from work to go on a trip with them for a few hours. Maybe that's what they need. Maybe I need to be able to answer the phone at sometimes at inconvenient times to talk to them. I have to always remember the purpose. Why am I doing this? Why are we going golfing together for 6 hours? Because this person needs a listening ear. Okay, so if I'm going to go golfing for 6 hours and I'll take off from work to do it, but then I'm so engrossed in the golf game that I can't be bothered by listening to the person share their problems with me, then what was the purpose? Why did I do it? I have to understand what I'm trying to get. And sometimes it's even the opposite. A person calls me and needs my listening ear, but then I realize at a certain point that maybe it's not healthy. Maybe it's becoming, maybe the person needs a little tough love or some boundaries. Maybe I need to tell the person, you can only call me once a day, because that's what the person needs. Again, if the question is, why am I doing this and what is the purpose? If I'm always asking that question, then I'll be able to navigate complex situations. Again, when the job is very limited and very well defined, we don't necessarily need to ask these questions, but we don't think of these questions. But when the job is big and when we have a responsibility for something, if I own a small business or a large business, if I'm a parent or a teacher, or if I'm a friend, and I'm someone who my job isn't one thing, but my job is everything. My job is to educate the students. So if I just want to get my paycheck and make sure that they pass the math regions, so I'll come in, make sure they know math, and that's it. But if my job is to educate the students, I'll look at the class, say, here's a class of young people that will not only learn math from me, but will learn how to behave as an adult. And maybe one day my job is coming not to teach math, but to teach the kids a lesson in respect, or in take the day off to take them on a trip just because they need that relaxation, they need that sense of mentorship. So when I really care about the larger goal, and when I really feel that I've been entrusted with the responsibility for something bigger than just showing up and punching the clock, then I'm able to think out of the box, but only if I'm able to remember to ask the question, because it starts with asking the question. And you think about the Seder. The Seder is, we can't get anywhere unless we can ask the question. We have to be able to look and say, well, what's going on? What's different over here? And how do we explain the difference? Because we can't notice when something's different if we're just doing an autopilot and showing up, doing the same thing again and again. It may have some value, but we're going to miss the point, or maybe miss a large part of the point. So this is what Ramchal tells us, that as Jews, our most basic question has to be, why am I here? What is my mission? And it's not a question that we can ask once or twice or 3 times. It has to be a question that we ask constantly, because our mission is so big and it's so broad and it encompasses everything, because every moment of our life is given to us as an opportunity to achieve that mission. It's going to change. It can change at any second. Maybe this minute my job is to do this, and that minute my job is to do that. My Rebbe of Leibowitz used to tell a story. He would talk about his father a lot, because Rosh Yeshiva he ran the yeshiva for almost 70 years, from the early 40s until 2008. And he inherited the yeshiva from his father, passed away in 1941. Father started the yeshiva in 1933. And as you know, 1933 wasn't a great time to start a yeshiva for various reasons. First of all, because in 1933, advanced Talmud study wasn't such a thing in America. I mean, advanced Judaism wasn't such a thing in America, and the culture certainly wasn't trending towards Orthodox Judaism, to put it mildly. It was also, history. It was in the depths of the Great Depression. So there were bread lines and apple lines. People literally couldn't put bread on the table. It wasn't the time where there were large endowment funds and philanthropic organizations that were going to give grants to yeshivas. There also weren't too many people who would even be candidates to be Talmud students. So, nevertheless, based on not getting into too many details, based on circumstances, this Rabbi David Leibowitz, his name was, in 1933, came to the conclusion that it would be the right thing to start a yeshiva, and he had 25 students from his previous employment, and he launched this venture with these 25 students. He called it the Chavetz Chaim Yeshiva. And so, he did it for 8 years. He passed away in 1941, which was Pearl Harbor Day. That was the funeral on Pearl Harbor Day. And he was only 52 years old when he passed away. And my understanding is a lot of the factor that led to his death at such a young age was the tremendous burden, difficulty, overwork, stress of creating this yeshiva under such difficult conditions. Now, my Rebbe, Yehuda's son, we'll talk about his father a lot. He would just clearly such an overpowering figure, so influential in his life. And he said really the reason he took on the responsibility when his father passed away, he was only in his early 20s at the time, was unmarried, and it fell to him to perpetuate the yeshiva, which was struggling. He felt he had no choice because he didn't want his father's legacy and all of his father's efforts to go to be lost, and he had no choice. So through all the difficulties, and there were many, over many decades, he stuck it out and gave his heart and soul to the yeshiva. He didn't tell a lot of, not what I remember. I don't remember a lot of specific stories about his father. You got clearly the sense he spoke about his father endlessly. You got a certain sense of the person, but it wasn't. We often like to hear, tell me a good soundbite, a good anecdote with a good punchline. There wasn't a lot of those. You just got this kind of sense of the type of person he was, his faith in Hashem, his sincerity, his integrity, his commitment. But there are one or two stories that we heard again and again and again. And this is one of them. He would say that shortly after his father started the yeshiva in 1933, there was a problem. There was unrest within the student body. Again, these were the 25 students that actually had the courage. They weren't the teachers; they were just the students. So